From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Our next panel will be speaking about accessibility. Their panel's Accessibility Matters, Reaching Readers with Disabilities. And the moderator of our panel is Laura Bailett. She is a Library of Congress Literacy Awards Advisory Board member, and she is the Chief Academic Officer of Kaplan Early Learning Company. Please welcome Laura Bailett.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. The focus of our panel today is on the millions of Americans, both children and adults, who struggle with reading. The Washington Post ran an article on November 1st, 2016 that was entitled, "Hiding in Plain Sight, the Adult Literacy Crisis." Trouble with reading truly is a hidden disability. The majority of people in this category have no outward signs of a problem, and they're typically quite intelligent. They're also highly motivated to keep others from knowing that they can't read. Somebody on an earlier panel mentioned the shame associated with being a struggling reader, and that's a huge issue, the shame and embarrassment. So this is not something that they share freely with friends, with coworkers, with educators, with their health providers, and their own family may not even recognize the extent of the problem. So many people in the public at large simply aren't aware that a problem this big exists. Our panel today is going to share some insights on Americans who struggle with reading for a variety of reasons, and also talk about the types of programs and technology that can help them gain access to printed materials. So I have a couple of slides just with some basic statistics on the scope and impact of reading struggles for children and for adults in the United States. The first two slides are an infographic from the National Center on Learning Disabilities. We're not going to go through all the statistics, but basically 1 in 5 American children struggles with a significant learning or attention challenge, and the vast majority of them do struggle with reading. Learning to read is a challenging task for the brain, so we shouldn't really be surprised that so many people struggle with it, but nonetheless, this is a problem with which nationally we're really honestly not making very good progress. And it's important to understand that the majority of children who struggle with reading, unfortunately today, grow into adults who are still struggling with reading. And let's see, This slide is from Pro-Literacy, the adult literacy education organization. They do fantastic work. Proliteracy.org is their website. And you can see here about 36 million adults in the United States cannot read at a 3rd grade level, but it's estimated that up to 50% of adults in the United States cannot read and comprehend a book written at the 8th grade level. 50%, I mean, that's a lot of people. And we know that children of parents who are poor readers have a higher probability of being a poor reader themselves. There's the genetic component. Dyslexia, for example, is very strongly inherited. If an adult has dyslexia, each of their children has a 30 to 50% chance of having dyslexia. But then if you're an adult poor reader, you're probably not going to surround yourself with books and other printed materials in your home. You're probably not going to model reading for pleasure or information for your children, and you're probably not going to read very many books with your children. And so this is a major intergenerational challenge. So now I'm going to turn things over to Kristen Fernikes, and she's going to talk about people with reading challenges as a result of physical disabilities and the services that the Library of Congress offers to them. So Kristen?
Should I come up there?
If you want, you can stay seated, or you can go up to the side.
I think I'm just going to stay here.
All right,
so
do it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. The group with whom I work here at the Library of Congress is the National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. We refer to it as NLS because we have quite a long name. NLS began in 1931 to serve specifically adults who were blind. Over a period of time, over the more than 85 years that we've been around, we've evolved our services over a period of time to reach a larger and larger group of people. So we serve people who are both blind and visually impaired, people who have physical disabilities that prevent them from being able to hold a book. To a lesser extent, we serve individuals who have dyslexia and other issues that may prevent it having accessibility to regular print materials. NLS serves people through an absolutely spectacular network of libraries around the country. Every state, Guam, Puerto Rico, to whom we serve by providing them with materials. So the types of materials that we provide are Braille, e-Braille, audio books, and then of course we do have a download service, which is of course in keeping with how a lot of people are accessing materials right now. In addition to books, which of course there's a lot of ways that you can get audio books, but we also provide magazines, guides, things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, but for individuals who have trouble reading print materials, things like tax guides, nutrition guides, and so on and so forth. So that puts us in a position of being somewhat unique. We're very proud of our collection, which at this point is hundreds of thousands, over 200,000 pieces. We also provide music scores and music instructional materials and so on and so forth. So we're trying to fill, I think, a void where we want to take into consideration that there's a lot of people that just have trouble with what's available from a print perspective, and so we're constantly looking at where those needs exist and then trying to address them. Increasingly, the individuals that we're serving with aging baby boomers and so on and so forth are people who may not have been blind their entire life, but have decreasing capacity seeing. So we know that that number's going up, and recently we have launched a pretty extensive outreach campaign to make sure that people are aware of these services, because they are provided free, and we want to make sure that people can read.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm really intrigued by e-Braille, so we'll have to come back and you'll have to tell me how that works. And now Dr. Elsa Cardenas-Hagen is going to talk a little bit more about individuals with dyslexia, and she also has a lot of expertise on dual language learners and the multiple challenges they face with learning to read and becoming lifelong readers. So, Elsa?
Yes, thank you.
And there are your slides.
What do you?
Yeah, that's the remote, so the green will advance.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for sticking with us this afternoon. I'm Elsa Cardenas-Hagen, and I am an English learner, so I understand the experience of an English learner, and during my time was when there was no such thing as bilingual education, and where we were punished if we used our native language in the school ground and in the lunchroom. And so, you know, as a young girl, being terrified to speak your home language, and then not realizing that your home language was such a beautiful language and such a beautiful thing, and I didn't realize that until middle school, because in middle school, that is when you take foreign language, and all of a sudden I could shine and say, look at what I know, and look at my culture, and look at the things that I know. But it was like, okay, hide who you are in these early years, but now, no, we will not hide who we are. And so a beautiful thing is that we now have available to children, you know, and I heard somebody saying I'm an ESL specialist, English as a second language specialist, and that's great because there's less than 3% of them in our whole United States, less than 3%, and yet we're the fastest growing population in our schools. And so, you know, we talk about, you know, we want to be prepared. We want to reach these students. We want to reach, you know, our African American population. We want to know about the culture and the language so that they will want to be responsive to us, so that they will want to be engaged and enthusiastic about learning. And I hope Benita is still here because I have my little, oh, there she is, my own dedication to Barbara Bush. And fortunately, Benita accepted this, but I was giving a speech in Houston and talking about all of our reading reform efforts and about how, you know, I live in one of the poorest communities of the whole United States for a middle-sized city. And despite that, through our efforts, you know, we've been able to, you know, it's 100% free and reduced lunch. We feed them breakfast and lunch, and we have after-school programs that, you know, also give dinner. But we keep them there, you know, to do the extra things, you know, the arts and the music and the books and reading. But one of the things, when I gave a speech, I had so wanted to meet Mrs. Barbara Bush, and I was in Houston, and I didn't get to meet her because there was like 1,000 people that day, and she was there in the audience. And so I went back to my own community, and I thought, oh, I missed a chance to, you know, at least greet a former First Lady. How cool would that be? Well, I get a phone call at my office and says, it's Mrs. Barbara Bush on the line. And I was like, hello, is that you, Juanito, playing a joke on me, you know? Because I had talked about how I didn't get to meet the First Lady. They go, no, for real, this is Mrs. Bush. And then she says, you go, girl. You blew me away, and I'm going to have you come to my celebration of reading in Houston, and you're going to tell about the work that you do, and you're going to write a speech. And I'm like, Mrs. Bush, I don't write speeches. I'm a storyteller, and I tell the story of what, you know, the work that we do. She goes, no, you're going to write your speech. So I'm like, yes, ma'am. So I wrote that speech. I go, who are the other speakers, by the way? And she goes, oh, you know, H.W. and George W. and Scott Turow and all these, Mrs. Baker. And I was like, oh, my God. So I write the speech and I send it to her, and she calls me back and she goes, well, let's talk a little bit more about your speech. I'm like, yes, ma'am. And she goes, you know, you mentioned George W., don't mention him. You know, she goes, it's nothing about the Bushes. It's about what you did in your local community and nothing about the governor of our state and how he helped you. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. And I said, well, while I've got you on the line, I need a little bit more money, and I know you're going to raise millions of dollars that evening, so do you mind if I talk about children also with dyslexia? And I would have a dream that in one of the poorest communities that we would have an expert on every campus in our city to work with these children who are English learners who, you know, have these disabilities, you know, these hidden disabilities that no one knows, and we just wait around. And she goes, well, how much are you needing? Right? And so I tell her the amount, and she says, you may put that in there, you know, and I'm like, okay. So that evening I get there, and Benita knows exactly what happened. So I get there and I give my speech, and I kind of weave in there that we're still working. And at the end of my speech, Mrs. Barbara Bush comes up and she goes, ladies and gentlemen, I have a huge surprise for Dr. Cardenas Hagen. Here's your check, no questions asked. I about fainted. Actually, I screamed and jumped, but anyway. And she says, I trust you to do the job. And so 2 years later, and I wanted to follow up with you, I was able to report back to her and said, I have some very good news. Mrs. Bush, I have good news to share. We have a dyslexia therapist in every campus of our city, in every school. And I'm here today to tell you, so that was between the years of 2011 and 2013, and I'm here to tell you in 2018, we still have that.
Wow.
That we keep, so sustainability.
Sustainability, that's huge.
And so through this work, and I say, you know, Mrs. Bush cared very much about, you know, all people, that they would be literacy, and that they would achieve literacy, because she had such a love of literacy and also had personal experience with, a child who had difficulty in those early years with literacy. And so I'm here today to talk to you about these children, about what Laura here is telling you about, that hidden disability, that being dyslexia, and what goes around it. And I am the vice president of the International Dyslexia Association. And so we are on a mission to really promote what we want a term to be used today called structured literacy. And that's a term that we want to really promote as, here we have these students who are so bright, so intelligent, nothing to do with intelligence, but they struggle with these, skills of how do you read? How does reading work? And as we look at this, and as we see, and as Laura mentioned to you, the majority of children in special education services are there because of a reading disability, and we will tell you 15 to 20% of those kids have dyslexia. And as we look at this, we see what are the issues with them. So one of the primary issues is that they have trouble just with the simple things of being able to process those sounds. And I'm a Spanish speaker, so we don't have as many sounds in our language as you do in yours, Some will say 44 to 46 sounds, and we have about half of that many sounds. And so just that ability to process those sounds, and a lot of research into exactly where that is in the brain, Herschel's gyrus, the left angular gyrus, and if you don't have that, then how are you going to put those letters and sounds together for those early literacy skills? Most kids can read, and they don't need these foundational skills, but dyslexic children will not be able to do it without learning how does reading work. And they try to trick you because they're so smart, and they depend upon their visual memory. And finally, things fall apart by the time all this reading to learn, or when the text gets so complex they can't handle that, right? And so as we look at that, the other thing, so they have that trouble with the phonological component of the language, taking in those sounds, putting those sounds to those symbols, but also, their spelling will be where you'll really, really see it. Spanish speakers, the language is transparent. And so you'll see that, they're able to come along. It seems like their decoding is okay, and where you'll find it is they won't be very fluent readers, and their spelling will very clearly suffer. And so what are the secondary things that we see? Well, if I don't have access to be able, and the ability to be, I need access that you talk about, but now I can't read what's in front of me, and I want so desperately to be able to do this, and I'm smarter than this other kid that can do it right next to me, right? And so what do we see as the secondary problems? Well, then you don't read. And because you don't read, what will suffer? Your vocabulary will suffer, Your reading, you're not going to read, if you can't read accurately or fluently, eventually your reading, that comprehension is going to suffer. And then certainly your written language. But the other thing is, what are some early signs? And so I'm a speech and language pathologist, and so as I look at children, when we see these children with these speech disorders called phonological processing disorders, and we're trying to really do the studies right now to really predict which ones of these phonological processing disorders will have dyslexia and which ones won't. And so that means these children, have you ever seen children that when they speak to you, and they're really little toddlers, you don't understand anything that they're saying? Well, we figure out in their speech and language world that they have a phonological processing disorder, and we can, really remediate that. We work with them intensely, but we follow those children very carefully because many of them may also have this disability that we know of as dyslexia. And the other thing is, dyslexia, this is a myth that it's a visual disorder. People think it's seeing things backwards or mirror reading. In fact, why would they do that? Well, it's about this ability to sequence and the ability for directionality, knowing, that you do this first and next and laugh, my right side, my left side. Some of us, actually they've seen, some of us women have trouble with that too, right? But I know to ask for directions. And the other thing is the early things of just, when we play with language You know, you all talked about Dr. Seuss books, you know, rhyming so important. And these are things that we've not only found out about the English language, the Spanish language, alphabetic languages, but we've also seen it in non-alphabetic languages, that how important this is. So this center, this reading center of the brain that we see in this left temporal lobe, is also your language center. And so I heard earlier today you mentioned about listening and speaking and reading and writing and being a storyteller. But, you know, literacy really, you know, we must have these opportunities for language to have ultimate goal of literacy. And that ultimate goal is that deep understanding of text and the enjoyment and the ability to be engaged and motivated about it. And so because of these issues, we start to feel really bad about ourselves if you have these disabilities. And what will end up happening for these students, if they don't have an expert teacher that can help them and work through this, what will end up happening is we see high levels. You know, the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development sponsors our research, and they sponsor it because we want to prevent these issues of reading disabilities, but also mental health disabilities, because these individuals become very anxious and depressed about their inability to read, and when they know, I am just as smart as this person and anybody in this room. And so we see these issues also related to attention. About 40% of our dyslexic students will also have issues with attention. And so we want to really get this early and remediate it early. And so our mission now is, I've had the opportunity to, you know, really understand about this, and through the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development grants, and the Institute for Education Sciences at the Department of Ed, we've been, you know, our research has been funded, and we've been able to look at these English learners, and we've been able to look at these children with issues such as dyslexia, and we've been able to look across languages and see what's going on across languages, and finally understanding how beautiful it is to be biliterate, to be, you know, to be able to read across languages, but to know that having that ability in one language will help you in that second language. And so we are looking now at making sure that all children, so our initiatives now are to look in the general education classrooms in these early years to make sure that children have access to beautiful language, to understanding how languages work, to understanding those sound system, the phonology, understanding the morphology, those words and word parts. 60% of the English language comes from Latin, and these, you know, Latin and Greek roots, which we call morphemes. Those are so important for us for learning the vocabulary of this second language, but also understanding how it works and how we put language together for sentences, how sentences make paragraphs, and how we're able to read. And so just really looking at that ability to get to what is our goal? To have wonderful comprehension and comprehension skills. But first, we have to make sure that they also have those early literacy skills of being able to read.
So you know, I'm going to be mindful of time and maybe give Lydia
so here's
a chance
here's my last slide. So the last slide here just shows we want deep levels of comprehension and expression and lifelong reading and writing habits, and we can start early, and we can work with our teachers in the general education classrooms to really achieve, and we won't stop until everyone can read. Thank you.
And we'll circle back to you.
Last slide.
And now we have Dr. Lydia Carlos, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the literacy challenges of persons of color. And you can sit or you can stand, however you want to do that. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about some solutions and technology.
So I am Lydia Carlos, and I am going to not talk generally about people of color, but specifically about Black children. And just say that a lot of the same issues and concerns that Elsa just shared are also issues and concerns for African American children learning English, learning the language of instruction and the language of business in schools. So if African American children speak African American English at home and they do not learn how to code switch, then they will have trouble reading later. They will have trouble learning to read early. One of the statistics that I read in my doctoral program that really solidified for me that I was going to work in early childhood was that 67% of children who struggle to read in kindergarten continue to struggle to read in 3rd grade. And so while we have a country that does not have universal preschool, that often does not have mandatory or full-day kindergarten, we know that there is so much that we can be doing for children who struggle the most early, and we should be doing that. And that is especially important for children who need to learn both the language of instruction and continue to value the language that they speak at home, the dialect that they speak at home. So there's research coming out now that bidialectism is just as beneficial as bilingualism. So for your brain, children who can do that code switching, who do have efficiency in both languages is very important. So this is something to value and celebrate with African American children, and not to talk about proper English versus improper English, but talk about language of school, language of instruction, and your home language. Like what you speak at home is just as valuable, but we want to give you opportunities. And that's the same way that we look at it with children who come to us speaking Spanish. But we don't always tell African American parents, please talk to your child in your home dialect. I've never heard a teacher say that. But we know to say, please read to your child, in your home language or whichever language is most comfortable for you. So those are the kinds of things that we should be saying to families of African American children as well. And I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that I've read some research where that code switching either between a dialect and a more formal version of a language, or between two or more actual different languages, really fosters working memory, and it also improves executive function, because you're having to really attend to multiple cues simultaneously and instantaneously decide, I need to speak in this language right now. I remember when I was working in the clinic years ago, I ran the neurocognitive assessment program in the child neurology division in a clinic in Florida. And I had a little 4-year-old who was referred to me for question of language disorder. He came from a Spanish-speaking home, and his English was behind. But I had an intern working with me who was from Colombia, South America, and she only spoke to him in English, but clearly with a Spanish accent. I obviously don't have a Spanish accent. And this child instantaneously would speak Spanish to my intern and speak English to me. And I said, okay, we're going to find out what your child's strengths are and if there are any weaknesses, but he doesn't have a language disorder, because he is sorting it out very, very quickly. And that's that code switching that is really great for executive function and frontal lobe function. And now there's research actually showing that being bilingual or trilingual is protective of Alzheimer's in later life. So bad for those of us who are monolingual, but we'll have to do the best we can. So I would love for each of you to share things that you're doing in your program or other programs that you're aware of that are solutions. Elsa, I know you were getting ready to talk more before I kind of cut you off to give Lydia a chance, but to talk about, we do know how to teach struggling readers to read. I mean, it's not necessarily easy for all of them, but we know what to do, and there are many examples where this is working. And it's interesting today, there hasn't been much discussion about the use of technology for struggling readers, even though many of us, even though we're good readers, also avail ourselves of audiobooks. So I want to also spend some time talking about technology. So I don't know who wants to go first. I can't choose. It's like choosing my favorite child. You know, I can't do that. So one of you jump in there to share an example of something you know that's working well, or some technology.
Well, one of the things there's so much available now, and a lot of it is for free. And so for our children with disabilities, some of them have, they don't want to write, they don't want to read. So some of the things we do as we get them into that reading is, we would use your services that you have for the audiobooks. We use Learning Ally. But the other thing is, just to get them even to want to also tell their stories and write, we use things like Dragon Speak, which is, something that they can just, download and get for free. And then they love that. They seeing what they've said in print, and that gets them to be more encouraged about that.
You had asked a question about e-Braille, and I did want to just follow up about that. E-Braille is amazing to me. Again, we have printed Braille materials available to our patrons. We also distribute our books in it's a format BRF. So these files can be downloaded and then imported to a digital Braille reader, which is this amazing machine that basically just I sort of describe it as a ticker. The pins come up to represent the Braille words, which is something that we're moving. Not only are we moving toward more books in e-Braille, we are also working to try and produce a more affordable e-Braille machine. So they're wonderful machines. They're a little bit fragile because you can imagine you've got pins sort of popping up all the time. And they're also not inexpensive. So it's such a quick way to be able to distribute books and other materials to people. So it's something that NLS is really pursuing. And my director just went to a huge conference out in California where people coming from all over the world looking for ways to create this technology in a way that is really going to be more accessible to people. Because, there's something very, in speaking to my colleagues who use Braille all the time, I think there's something about taking that information in that way that is very familiar, and it's something that for anybody who feels, this deep love of reading books, there's also this tactile component of it to it.
Right.
So we do want to make sure that we can achieve that and make it as accessible as possible. It's amazing technology. We're hoping to get it out to more people.
And I was just on a plane this morning. I wasn't supposed to be, but I was. And before I got on the plane, from the hotel to the airport, there was a mom from a small town in Alabama, and she was talking about her first grade reader who was struggling with reading and not getting all the help she wanted from the teacher. So two resources that I gave her were, one was RAS Kids, Reading A to Z, but the RAS Kids portion of it is online, allows the children to read, but also to read into the book, and it records it. So when I was a teacher a long time ago, that was very helpful for me because I could go back later and actually analyze the children's reading, whereas I wouldn't have time to do that with every child in the room right at that moment. So I gave her that resource, and then the kids were also just more motivated because it was on a computer and it was pretty and animated. And then a newer resource is called Beanstack, and it is like Fitbit for books. And so, I'm around babies now and toddlers and preschoolers, and babies know how to swipe, right? Mm-hmm. They are using technology more and more early in life, and so the ability for them to get badges and see where they're falling is motivating. for kids. So that's another resource that it's really used now a lot in summer reading programs. So that's a cool thing that you can suggest to families and teachers. And I want to say one more thing. Oh, and the other thing is ensuring that you have as many culturally relevant books as possible from the earliest age. So, and not just, there are a lot of books for African American students, children now, or not a lot, but there are some books there, but many of them focus on I love my hair, or things that are important, but are not getting into academics, and I can be a chemist. I can be, you know, I have an ability to see myself as an academic, as whatever it is that they want to do. And that is super important, that we continue to create more culturally relevant books that reflect the children doing things that are aspirational. So just trying to make sure that you find those for kids as young as possible.
And Lydia, I think you mentioned to me that you've worked with First Book on that topic, and First Book was one of the Rubenstein Award winners for the Library of Congress Literacy Awards program a couple of years ago. So can you comment a little bit on that? This is a topic that the Literacy Awards Board has discussed fairly regularly, is the issue of diversity in books, both children and adults. And I know all the publishers are focusing on that, but I'd love to hear more about what you're doing with First Book.
So I am a fan of First Book. I have not had the opportunity to work with First Book, but First Book, what I love about what they're doing is that they have a whole, I wouldn't even say it's a section, they have an initiative to ensure that books that are written by people of color, that reflect people of color, are prominently shared with schools, with organizations that need to get books. And so that is super exciting for me because I want to see the kids represented in the books that they're reading. And when I was at Apple Tree Institute, one of our initiatives was to write books. We wrote over 120 books while I was there. 66% of them feature children of color, and the reason that, or people of color, and the reason that we did that was because when we went and spent weeks, I sent the writers and had them spend weeks in the libraries. We could not find many books that were talking about physics and astronomy, or archaeology and paleontology, or earth science that had people of color dominant in what was happening. But our schools were 97, 95% African American, and there was no one that looked like them represented. So we were able to do that work for the curriculum that we were writing, and so now when I see more organizations that are doing that more broadly and then trying to curate and make sure that everyone has access to books like that, it just does my heart good.
So for those of you who are mindful of time, Guy gave me permission to go a little bit longer, so I'm going to take it. So we have a few more minutes, and I did want to point out to you the last couple of slides that my panel collectively created. This is not an exhaustive list of technology resources, but it's a good sampling of some of the technology resources that are available, or websites that talk about resources that are available. So Reading Rockets is on there. So I have two slides because there's so many things now. Audible.com is the Amazon one, right? So that one you have to pay for. I was on that website very briefly this past week in preparation for the panel, and they actually had a quote on there. It said, quote, "Listening is the new reading." So remember that, because I want to circle back. I want to canvass this group and see what you think about that. But it's interesting. And then Lydia mentioned Beanstack, Bookshare, Coloring Colorado, Dyslexia, Yale, IDA's new website. And I'm coming back to you, Elsa. I have a question for you. Headstrong Nation is a really interesting website. It was created by Ben Foss, who's an absolutely brilliant guy with very severe dyslexia and ADHD by his own admission. And he, on his website, teaches struggling readers how to access audible text. And so I was on his website, and I hate to admit that I did not know this, but on every Microsoft computer now that is reasonably recent, and on every reasonably recent Apple computer, it is already built in. You can get Audible on everything that's on there. Everything, whatever page you're on, you just right-click, and then it says read aloud, and it just reads it aloud to you. It's amazing. So there's incredible resources for people who either struggle to read or for whatever reason they prefer to listen to something because they're driving or because it's just easier for them to process information. So that's already available on tablets and on computers. And then there are, I put the, your website, the loc.gov, NLS, learningally.org has, I can't remember how many hundreds of thousands of book titles. You do have to pay for that service. A lot of school systems purchase that service so that the child or the family doesn't have to pay, but you can order any book and it is actually read by a human being. Which is very, very nice. The computer-generated speech is getting much, much better, but it's still computer-generated. But these are actually read by live people, so you get the vocal inflection and that kind of thing. And so, anyway, this is some representative websites. But I would love to ask Elsa and hear from others on my panel, what is the International Dyslexia Association approach right now with people with dyslexia, especially children? How early should we introduce audiobooks and you know, make these tools available to them versus continuing to try and help them and prioritize them actually becoming readers? I think that's a really huge issue. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so, well, the huge initiative we have right now is making sure our teachers are well equipped to teach all kids, including children with disabilities such as dyslexia. And we can prevent many of them ever getting to special education when we do that before the 3rd grade. I mean, we know that. And then when we don't identify them before the 3rd grade, and we look at them in 9th grade, we look at them, they still remain, 67% of them will remain well below, you know, that expected reading level. So we're really focused on, you know, more, working on the prevention as well as the intervention. But what was that? So when we look at them in 3rd grade, and we look at them and we look, if we identify them in 3rd grade and then we follow them to 9th grade, then we're still seeing that they're still below their average reading level in the 9th grade.
They're below grade level.
Yes, below grade level.
50% of kids are below grade level anyway.
Yeah, yeah. No, we need to do a better. Yeah, we have children that aren't. That's right, and especially when we look at the English learners and we look at our African American population. If you look at the NAEP scores, yes. But what we want to look at in regards to that, you know, there's always the question about when do we introduce all these extra accommodations, right? Because then, you know, then you're like, oh, well, why should I have to read when I have all this ability to gain the access? And then you're right about young children. They're already, you know, as infants already, you see them already doing that, and they have no fear of technology like us old people do. And so, you know, so number one, we always want to teach them to read, but we do also want them to have access, and why can't you, you know, do the both at the same time?
And I just say for all kids, but especially for kids who are struggling to read or to learn in school, teaching them about metacognition is super important from preschool. So teaching them to understand how they learn best is really important.
So I'd like to open it up now to questions or comments from everyone in the audience, and also questions for the panel that went ahead of us, developing and sustaining lifelong readers. So what do you guys think? Or what questions do you have?
None.
We answered it all.
Maybe as a question.
So I just have, I'm just kind of curious about folks that have dyslexia in different orthographic systems. So how does that play out?
That's right. So when we look across languages, even languages that are non-alphabetic, as I mentioned, we do see that they still will have difficulty in this issue, the phonological component of the language. When we look at languages that are more transparent, such as like Italian and Spanish, we see that, you know, because of that transparency and the regularity, they seem to be able to get at that decoding okay, not so bad, but what they won't have is the fluency and then the orthography, the spelling and writing.
There has been cross-linguistic research quite a bit, and dyslexia has been found in virtually every written language. So, but the exact format and the brain processing patterns associated with it will differ according to the structure, the linguistic structure of the language. So it's really fascinating. I mean, the short answer is, as I said, learning to read is a challenging task for the brain. I've heard one neuroscientist say, you know, dyslexia wasn't a problem until Gutenberg invented the printing press in the 1400s, and the masses were suddenly expected to become readers. I mean, before then, you know, it was a select few who were readers and writers, and everybody else, you know, it was all oral. So all of a sudden, we created a new class of disability with the printing press. It's a very challenging, late emerging skill in the course of human development. So it is challenging, but having said that, we do know how to teach most, if not all, children to read. And it is never too late to teach someone to read, but you get far better outcomes if you take an earlier preventive approach. So was there a question?
So I just have something more to mention about that. So in our studies are mainly with Spanish-speaking English learners that have disabilities, and then looking at those components and looking across languages and the cross-linguistic features. And we find that, for example, if they have those capabilities in their language, then they're going to be on a great journey towards literacy in their second language, and that if they didn't have those abilities, well, then certainly it affects their first language. It's going to certainly affect their second language.
Benita, do you have a question?
A lot of materials for adults with dyslexia and other learning disabilities. I mean, as you know, as we've all said, the content of what people read has a tremendous effect on motivation and everything else. Right. And as you mentioned, the psychological damage to somebody who as a child has reading difficulties, learning difficulties, only increases as you grow older. I've seen people say, well, it's the same skills, so we give them children's materials. Right. That flies in the face of everything else that we know. Is there anything that you would recommend that you've seen that's specifically designed for adults?
To teach them reading, but that's developmentally appropriate teaching materials. Exactly. I think that is a huge problem, and as much as there are similarities in how children learn to read and adults learn to read, they're very, very different. I really know what dyslexia is, first and foremost, because I had to teach a 37-year-old dyslexic man to read. And I had previously been trying to teach kindergarten through 8th graders to read, but they weren't able to tell me what they were getting and what they weren't getting. He was a really bright guy who had great self-awareness and insight. He could tell me exactly what parts made sense to him and exactly what didn't make sense to him. And I feel like with adult learners, we often don't take advantage of the learning capabilities that they have that you simply don't have at age 6. But I don't know if you can comment on specific programs. Oh, absolutely.
Employers and everybody else. So their mental skills, extremely strong, quite bright. So not drawing on that's the major piece, not drawing on their background information, not drawing on the skills they've developed and pretending they're the same as children by going through a skills-based approach, I think is, from my experience, is just a major mistake.
This is not specific to adults with dyslexia, but one of the amazing interventions I saw at a Head Start program is that their approach to family literacy and how they are teaching adult literacy is by using the child's report card, by using the things that go home, the newsletters, so that they're using materials that are important to the parent and meaningful, and they are going about that in a way that is systematic and supportive and helps them get throughout the year and understand and be able to be great advocates for their kids.
And that gets back to, in a couple of the earlier panels, the theme of relevance has kept coming up, that the materials, you don't have to have everything, it doesn't have to be completely comprehensive, but whatever you do have, it better be relevant. And it needs to be relevant like right now, because now they're gonna read that report card or that newsletter and they need to respond right now. 2 weeks from now, they've missed that opportunity. So that just-in-time kind of relevance is important. Elsa, were you?
I just think that that's exactly what I was going to say. So you have to, so when you work with the adults, it has to be the things that they want to read, what's relevant to them, and let's help you to figure out, you know, how to get through that and understand it well. So that's, you don't treat them like you would a little kid. Absolutely not.
I can share another quick story of my adult with dyslexia. So 2 things brought him into our clinic at Northwestern University. One was he wanted to be able to read to his children, which he'd never done before. And number 2, he was so capable in his job at Glidden Paints. He was running all of their very complicated equipment and machinery, and he was so good at it, and this was in the late 70s, early 80s, when the EPA said, you know, we've got to stop, our paint manufacturers have to stop polluting. And so all the paint manufacturers were going to have to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on really expensive anti-pollution equipment. So his boss had given him these huge detailed manuals and said, Mel, I need you to read these and tell us which piece of equipment we should buy. Well, you can imagine his terror at that. He would take everything home, and his wife, who spoke like 8 languages, would read it aloud to him, and he would memorize it, that memory capability, so that he could go back the next day and fake that he was reading it and spouting off what it said. So anyway, those were the things that brought him in, but what he really wanted to do was open his own heating and refrigeration company. So I had to get him through an 895-page textbook on heating and refrigeration. So that was quite a scene, as you can imagine, for 2 years. But I could never get him to see and hear patterns in rhyming words like hat, mat, fat, cat, sat. But one day, one Tuesday night, he brought the book into me, and he was so excited to show me. He had highlighted all the words in this heating and refrigeration book that ended in U-R-E. Pressure, moisture, temperature, and for the first time, the concept of patterns in words made sense to him. Would I have ever thought to show those words to him when he couldn't read? No, but that's just what I'm saying. They will tell you what they need and what will work for them. You have to partner with them, and you have to ask them, what are you motivated to read about? So he got his heating and refrigeration program. Yep.
It goes back to what Joshua and Louise spoke about earlier as far as empathy. And those people who are teaching adult literacy have to maintain empathy and non-judgment when they are teaching them, so that they do feel more liberated to choose, and also feel more liberated to choose what is relevant to them in order to learn to read and knock out adult illiteracy. And that way you can better knock out childhood illiteracy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you to my wonderful panel.
Thank you again for another great discussion, and we'll break until 3 o'clock, and then we'll have our last panel. Thanks. Okay, thanks again for staying around for our last program, and I think it's going to be well worthwhile because it's a topic that really has woven itself throughout all the discussions today, and that's the important topic of diversity in books, the current state and the future. And we could not have a better moderator for this panel than Ellen O, who is an author, and she is the CEO and president of We Need Diverse Books. So please welcome Ellen O.
Do I have to get up, or can I stay seated? All right, good. Whew, that's good for my back. Hi, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here because I'm on panel with two of my favorite people. And we know each other because we all work with, for We Need Diverse Books together. And it's been 4 years, 4 momentous years. Lots of change has happened. Let me show a little bio first, though, because I actually took the time to do this. First, we'll start with Meg Medina. Meg, talk a little bit about yourself.
Oh, so I'm Meg, and those are some of my titles. I am very proud to be a founding member of We Need Diverse Books with Ellen. I'm also very proud to do a lot of programming here at the Library of Congress, and as it happens, a lot of research on my books here at the Library of Congress. For Burn Baby Burn, I was here for hours and hours and hours. And I spent the morning doing the same thing today, so I'm very happy to be here today.
And Meg's books are amazing, and I'm sure all of you have read all of them, right?
Yeah. Say yes.
Yes. Okay, so Bemi Olubemisolo Rude Perkovic,
Yes.
and her wonderful books is, like, I have to say, 8th grade Super Zero, I love this book. Burn Baby Burn, I love this. These are like 2 of my favorite books in the world. So imagine how I feel sitting here, sitting with my 2 favorite authors of great books. So please tell a little bit about yourself.
Well, you said just about all that needs to be said.
New book.
So I'm Olubemi Sola Rude Perkovic, and I'm the author of 8th grade Super Zero and the co-author of 2 Naomis and forthcoming Naomis 2. And then also this fall, Someday Is Now, the story of Clara Luper and the 1958 sit-ins, and Above and Beyond, NASA's Journey to Tomorrow, which was a lot of fun to work on in a rush because it was just so different, and it was an opportunity for me to find a lot of hidden histories and her stories that were involved in NASA's work over the years. So that was incredible. Before I was an author for a very long time, starting as a college freshman, I worked in literacy, family literacy, and youth development, and that informs a lot of the work I do now with We Need Diverse Books.
Oh, we have to go back for one little second because, Meg, what is the new book coming up this year?
Oh, it's Mercy Suarez Changes Gears, which comes out in 2018 and began as a short story in our anthology, which I think cycles back to your work, Ellen. Now you're in the hot seat.
Yes.
So I'm Ellen O, and the book she's talking about is Flying Lessons, which is on the slide, which is the short story anthology that WNDB put together. It has been a remarkable experience being able to take that book all over the country to students and kind of let them know that this is a book of stories for everybody. But let me talk also about WNDB, because I think that since 2014, a lot has changed. What do you think, guys? Yeah? And I think some of my proudest moments, I think for all of us, some of our proudest moments is seeing the actual work become reality. Yeah. So, Ben, if you don't mind, can you talk about the internship program?
Sure. The Internship Grant Award Program, we award grants of usually $2,500 to applicants from underrepresented backgrounds who get internships in the children's publishing industry. So they could be with publishing companies, with literary agencies, and they may not always be editorial. We've had some interns who were in marketing and publicity, in art direction, which is great to sort of have that diversity in their experiences. And in addition to the grant, we throughout the summer, we offer them opportunities to meet with publishing professionals and to meet with, like, I took them on a trip to, I'm like, intern mom in the summer. So to meet with booksellers, to meet with people who work in lots of different areas of the industry so that they can see not just where they work, but some of the different opportunities that they can have. And we've had, out of 25 WNDB interns, I think 14 have already gone on to get full-time jobs in children's publishing or in publishing. And a lot of the rest are still in school, because you can be either a student or a recent graduate. So we've just been really proud of them.
I get to highlight the fact that my editor's assistant is actually a WNDB intern. So that's been an amazing feeling to be working with somebody who started off as an intern. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the reason why the internship program is so important is because statistically, publishing has been 90% white. And what that translates into is less books about, people of color and other marginalized communities, and also a lack of understanding of what these communities are going through and what a book would look like if it's going to be authentic.
And one thing that was important to us with giving a grant was that when people get these internships, even if they are paid, they're not paid very much. And to live and work in New York City is expensive. So that was a big barrier to a lot of people from marginalized backgrounds to just being a part of the industry.
Exactly. So now we also get to talk about grants and mentorships and the Walter Award and WNDB in the classroom. And yeah, we have a lot of programs, and they're doing great. We have these wonderful success stories that we can point to. For example, Angie Thomas was our inaugural WNDB grant winner. And look, she is on fire. Yeah. So we have all these programs, and the idea is to really give opportunities to writers who just have not had them before, and also to promote and market books in ways that they have not received before, because how can you know about or see or read a book if you've never heard about it, right? Which kind of takes me to the next issue, which is the changing face of the New York Times bestsellers list. What do you think, Meg?
So I think a couple of things. The first thing that comes to mind as I'm listening to us sort of detail what's been happening on our end over the past few years. A couple of things to know. First is that if you look around this room, everybody in here is pretty much like-minded in terms of feeling the importance of books that represent all kids, windows, mirrors, that entire conversation. But we are well past that conversation now. We don't want to, we're all in agreement. Yes, yes, and now what? So this is sort of like 2.0 at this point. What is the next series of things that we need to look at? And what I'm so proud of that We Need Diverse Books has done with its partners and with a very small volunteer group of people is create action that really has the greatest hope of changing who's at the table, making decisions, making conversation around the books we're choosing and how we market them. So when I look at this list also, I can't help but think of what the list looked like 4 or 5 years earlier, right? So this is the New York Times bestsellers from April, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and so do we have a graphic of the one from 2012, or we were not able to?
We weren't able to.
At that one, there was one author who I am so proud to say is a good friend of mine, but Wonder was still on the New York Times bestseller list 6 years ago. People, that's a long run. And Raquel, R.J. Palacio is Colombian, so we had that. But everybody else was a white author on that list.
And mostly male.
And mostly male. And so it's amazing to see the change. And it's not only WNDB, obviously. There are many, many warriors on the ground who are pushing this ball forward. But that's the thing that makes my heart sing. And addresses, I don't know how you felt when you started, but when I first started, like this myth or this worry that we were going to be niche authors, that we were only speaking to a small like I could only be speaking to Latino readers, right? And that our books wouldn't sell widely. Goodbye that idea.
Exactly, we're destroying myths. You know, this myth, this idea that publishing had for such a long time, that black books didn't sell, that books about Latinos or Asians, that they didn't sell. And we have destroyed that myth because of all those red circles on that list. So it's an amazing feeling to see that change, and what we have to do is to keep that going. And like Meg said, it's not just WNDB, it's everybody, it's all of you, it's the librarians and the teachers and the parents and booksellers and everybody who cares. And that brings me to the role of gatekeepers in children's literature, because in general, we are talking about us as gatekeepers who kind of are all on the same page, right? That's what Meg said. If we're here, we probably all care. But we have to kind of take this message more globally and make all people realize how important it is to talk about, like, teaching empathy to children from a young age, which I think if we take the next slide, no. Okay, I'm skipping slides, sorry. I wanted to go to this slide, because this was 2012, right? If we're talking about a New York Times book list from that time period, this is what the statistics for the books look like. Out of 3,600 books published in that year, 7% were about a child of color. And if we don't talk to gatekeepers about why diversity is so important, we're never going to change what's happening. We're always only going to be talking to the same like-minded people, right? We got to kind of get beyond that base. So now do I have to go back?
And I think it has a lot to do with, for ourselves, we should start asking that question. There's a writing assignment that's given a lot, where I'm from, or asking where am I from. So as gatekeepers, asking ourselves, even as the people who already feel like we're doing pretty well, or like we got this, where am I from? And what does that mean about the books that I recommend, about how I share literature, how I talk about literature, how I see the population that I serve? Am I sort of using a deficit model, even unconsciously? What are the implicit biases I have? And asking ourselves those hard questions and figuring out what we're going to do about them on a very personal level.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing that changed for me in this whole process. So I was a teacher before I was an author. It was a job I loved, and of course I loved the role of children's books in my classroom was really, really large. As a teacher, I remember doing this, and certainly as an author, you know, and I was just talking about this a few minutes ago because I have this book coming out in September, and you're waiting for the reviews, right? And so what are the reviews you're thinking of? You're thinking of Kirkus. Right? That's the scariest one of all, right? Kirkus review. And then SLJ, and like all of the major reviewing places. So the interesting thing is that I have started to ask myself harder questions about that relationship also, because the truth is that those reviewing agencies are also struggling with biases that they're just now uncovering, and a lack of not a lack of, but a very, very few number of people of color writing the reviews. And so you don't know what you don't know, right? You fall into these mistakes or in statements or a lack of tuning into something really important in a book because it's not part of your experience. So one thing that's really changed for me is that sure, I go to Kirkus and SLJ and so on, and I'm peeking at what they say about my book and books that I'm interested in, but I also make a stop at the blogs and so on of librarians of color, of academics, and I am trying to listen to what the conversation is and to pick up on my own biases. And we were talking about this at lunch, that, you know, even with authors of color and people from diverse backgrounds, we have biases too. And it's so, like, you have to just ask yourself hard questions, which is, I think, what we were talking about in terms of this work at 2.0. It's now getting to the really uncomfortable parts where you have to look at things you used to do, opinions you've had, and how you've changed, and really owning that.
I think it's also important that we also talk about, we change how we talk about books in a way that, like, for example, for me, I was always like, representation is important, representation is empowering, that's all great, and yes, absolutely, very important, but empathy is really important. And part of that process is making sure white kids read about black kids read about Latino kids read about Asian kids read about disabled. You see the circle? We have to actually be completely open and learn from each other, become empathetic. Empathy is not, something we're born with. Empathy is what we learn. If you don't know about somebody from from a different community or background, because you've never had any experience with that, community, where are you going to turn to?
And I think that comes in, I think of how sometimes even when we mean well and mean to be inclusive, we end up otherizing. And it reminds me of an experience I had as a middle schooler. After having been a kid who moved around a lot to all these different schools in different countries, and being this new kid over and over, I came to this one school in suburban New York, and where the teacher meant to be welcoming. And on my first day, when I really just wanted to stay under the radar, kind of get the feel of the place, and then be cool and fit in and I don't know, be president or whatever I had in my head. I had just moved from Lagos, Nigeria. We had lived in Lagos, Nigeria for a year and then come to New York. So the teacher was like, oh, we have a new student who's just come to us from Africa. Come up to the front of the room and tell us all about Africa. So that was a problem for a lot of different reasons. But the one thing that she did was, in trying to, I think, include me and welcome me, she really otherized me. And in middle school, that's really not cool.
It's the, where are you from? No. Where are you really from? And I now say, my mother's uterus. Because that is actually where we're really from. No, but seriously, the whole point is that this idea of making people feel like they're not real Americans is what comes from that question. So if we don't actually have empathy and from the start make an assumption that there's no difference between us and that we can't consider people from different backgrounds as oh, I can't relate, which actually takes me to another story, by the way. I have to jump around. I tell this story a lot because it's kind of important. I was once at the bookstore, and there was a little white girl reading The Mighty Miss Malone, which is a great book, and it has a beautiful little black girl on the cover. And this girl was she's reading this book. I mean, she's several chapters, and she has broken the binding. I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, they need to buy this book, right? But then her mother comes over and takes the book out of her hand and says, no, honey, that book is not for you.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
It happens a lot.
I've had that so many times,
Yeah. So what is the message that child took away? I don't think that the mom is racist, but I think her actions were. I think it was unintentional. And I think that's what we have to talk about, is systemic racism, systemic bias, that we've the biases that we've internalized without even knowing about it.
I think about that with the titles of my books sometimes. I have Spanish in the title a lot. The Aisa wants a car, Mango Abuela and me. So it's very identifiable, right? You can pretty much piece it together. And I have, in my more insecure moments, wondered about someone like that standing in front of the book and making a decision about who gets to read this book. So, and I think that that's a real question. I mean, I've certainly met librarians who will say, sometimes we don't have very many Latinos in my school, so we don't really buy that many books about Latinos. I've had, conversations that run like that.
They don't have any dragons in their neighborhood either.
Right,
they don't have any hobbits.
Right.
They don't have any talking gorillas.
They don't. But my feeling is that if you don't, that's why you need my books more than anybody else.
Exactly.
But I do feel like that plays into just what you're saying. So that's just that's an example of a bias, like a simple bias that has really wide-reaching repercussions.
Or even in publishing, I've had conversations with editors and agents who will say, I care about diverse literature. I want diverse authors or diverse books, but they don't come across my desk, or they don't come to me, is basically the message. And the idea that, okay, maybe you need to go out and look or do some extra work is really difficult for a lot of people to understand.
Yeah.
Well, which takes me to the next question, which I have to go back. Right here. Okay, so first of all, this quote, "We live in a world where the forces that seek to divide us are strong. To overcome them, we must do more than simply stand next to one another in silence." I love this quote because it talks, to me, it takes us to the point that right now you're seeing the rise of the author activist. So I know why it's important for me. I'd love, Meg, for you to talk about it too.
Well, what I would say is that I don't have the luxury of stepping out of who I am, right? So I'm a Latina woman, this is the experience I have, and so I don't feel like I can turn my back on that. And I also feel like I just can't see a way to do this work, publishing right now in this time, with this opportunity that is available to us to really reshape how we're thinking about these books without doing some heavy lifting. So I have this thing that I've been talking about called radical abundance, right? Abundance is such a pretty word. It just sounds nice, right? And radical sort of speaks to me. So radical abundance is my desire to certainly promote my own work and my own creative development. That's great. But also to make room at the table for new authors who come. And the story that I often use is my mother-in-law used to always say, she had this really ugly little dining room table. It was a little round thing, 42 inches. But the strangest thing about this table is that if 4 people were sitting there eating, we all fit. If 6 people were eating, we still fit. If 8 people were eating, we were all there, cutting small, but we were there. So it's amazing, right? And she used to say, in Spanish, "Esta mesa se estira como un chicle," meaning this table stretches like a piece of gum. And I love that. And so I feel like it's important for us to stretch the table like a piece of gum. So and it's easy, it's fairly easy to do. So like when I'm invited to NCTE to do a roundtable talk, my response is now not just, "Sure, I'd love to." My response is, "I'd love to. Do you mind if I also bring Juana so-and-so, whose new book is blah, blah, blah?" If somebody is asking me to blur books, I don't blur books, but I say, I do other things. Can we do a shared thing on my blog or an event so that I'm introducing somebody else? And I ask librarians and teachers all the time to take a risk on new authors coming to the table. You can invite the 6 big Latino authors over and over again. We'd love to come. But there's more of us, right? So pair us, maybe. Somebody well-known with somebody new. And that's the radical abundance. Now, the pushback that I've gotten on it is this. From a very well-known author who I respect immensely, she said to me, we were at a conference, she said, "But is that fair?" She said, "I have been at this for 25 years, and I was told, I'm sorry, I can't take your book on my list because we already have an author of this background, etc." And, she's very accomplished now, and she just feels like, is it really fair to ask me, after all of that work that I did, to keep doing this now for you two? And I said, it is not fair, but as my mother always said, what is, right? And so nothing's fair, but that's the job, man. And so that's what I say. So I am encouraging you to embrace radical abundance, and to certainly don't forget about my books. I really do want to come to your schools and so on, but to take risks on new voices. And if I'm promoting a new voice, to bother to pick up their book and see what that's about. Because in the end, like, nobody's forever. You're not forever, you're not forever, I'm not forever. I'm going to have my day in the sun, and I'm thrilled for it. And it may be this day, right? But it's not forever. And it's important to stretch the table.
What makes sense?
No, you can't just say what makes
What
sense.
makes sense? What makes sense?
How do you stretch the table?
I mean, I think it's stretching the table, and also all of us, like, it doesn't have to just be authors as activists, librarians as activists, teachers as activists, like all of us figuring out in our space what we can do. And that really leads me to talking about how sometimes that also leads to moments or seasons of discomfort.
Ah, wait,
Oh, yes,
hold on.
we have a good one for this.
I do?
Yes. I am uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It does look terrible. That poor dog.
But I feel like I know I do, avoid feeling uncomfortable and avoid discomfort. And when I first started out as a literacy, whatever I was supposed to be, literacy instructor as a college freshman, I had this experience of our job being to basically walk around these neighborhoods in New York City and knock on people's doors cold and sort of be like, hey, I'm Olubemi Sola, and I'm here to talk to you about nutrition and literacy. And it was this family literacy program where we talked about recipes and grocery shopping as a way to engage parents in literacy activities, and then we read to children. So I had no idea what I was doing, and I don't even know how we got that job, like, at that stage. And we had a lot of uncomfortable experiences and had to work through them. I had an experience on my very last day when I told one of the students in the family that I would take her to the museum, because she had never been to the Museum of Natural History in New York. And so I was like, oh, I'll take you to the museum. And her mom said that was okay. I came to pick her up on that day. I'm 18, and there were 17 other kids who had come for this museum trip. They had like told everybody. Yes. I was freaking out. What am I gonna do? So, like, we went to the museum, and luckily natural history is suggested admission. So I think I paid like a dime for everybody. And then I had said we would go to pizza afterward. And we went to this one place that I didn't realize was like kind of high-end pizza. So we went in and sat down and drank our water. And then when I saw the menu, I was like, guys, we have to get up and go. Right. Because I didn't have enough money. So I say all this to say that was discomfort. And sometimes when we don't want to stretch ourselves or have these conversations, we're thinking more about our own discomfort than about our readers, our students, our communities and our populations. And we're thinking about being afraid of being in that position of not knowing, or of losing authority, or of losing control. And I think we have to understand that sometimes we're not going to know. And we're going to have to be in a position to tell students or tell people, I really don't know. Or think about doing things a different way. I worked with a school that had a book club for a long time that was a sort of mock Newbery book club. Then one year I did the book club, but we called it a social justice book club. And what we did with fifth graders was say, okay, you guys have a mission. There are a lot of books in this library that nobody ever checks out. Let's go through and analyze the shelves. First, let's think about what we have in this library and why we think it's here. Is it because the adults loved these books when they were kids and just keep putting the same books in the library? So there was that issue that we talked about with the students. And then we pulled books and said, okay, your mission is to read and share these books with your peers. These are books that you might think are great after you read them, but nobody's reading them. So how can we share these books and get them circulating. So the kids felt like they had a mission and that they were doing something to promote diverse books in their community. And sometimes we pulled books, the librarians and I pulled books that all the kids in the club were like, yeah, we don't like this. And so they had space to say, we don't like this, and here's why. You guys can try reading it. Good luck with that, but this isn't our thing. And we just left that space open to do that.
Yeah. I think that the discomfort thing from the adult perspective is this, and I just had this talk at the North Texas Teen Book Festival, and that's that you're in this room, we're all locked in this like little sweet bubble, right? This is not where the heavy lifting happens. The heavy lifting happens when you are at a meeting with someone who you admire very much, and you have to point out that a book on the shelf is hurtful for X, Y, or Z reason, or you have to disagree about the selection of a book, or you have to point out some bias. Like, that's where the heavy lifting is. Isn't it Neville who says this in Harry Potter? He gets that award for standing up to his friends in the first book of Harry Potter. Like, that's the award you need to get, people, right? Because that's where the heavy lifting is, right? That's where the discomfort is. The discomfort also comes, for me, when I'm asking myself harder questions as I'm writing.
Yeah.
So just for Mercy Sweatis, changes gears, we were like in the late stages, right, of pages. And, you know, I talk about diversity all the time. Of course I'm sensitive. Of course I'm above making any kind of mistake, blah. So here's what happens, right? I'm reading through my pages, looking for commas and so on. And I see this line that Mercy says. She's talking to her brother, and he's ignoring her. And she says, so Rolly plays deaf, and what, you know, blah, 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 and he goes on. And I thought about that. I said, well, there's no problem saying that unless you are a person who's hard of hearing or has hearing trouble. And then it feels really lousy to have somebody say I'm playing deaf. So I struck it out, and I wrote something else, and I felt icky for being a person who had made such a gross error, I guess. But I took the time to pause and ask myself hard questions, and the frustration I have sometimes is when authors don't take that pause, and they assume that they have the right to tell any story, and they don't necessarily have the respect or the nuance or the understanding to tell it.
Right.
And then they hurt people, and then you're in the position of trying to explain why. That I find exhausting. Do you find it exhausting?
Oh, yeah. We have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And I know that's hard. Nobody likes being uncomfortable. Right? It's like having a perpetual wedgie. It's not comfortable. But
like Spanx.
Yeah.
Emotional
Spanx. And you just...
Not that we know.
That's a constipated look, man. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, but for me, I think the conversations are so important. And I'll just give you an example. I was at an event, and somebody came to me and had taken screenshots of my Facebook page at a time when I was very upset about certain things that had politically happened in the world and might have used some language that might have been very problematic. And so they shared with me my screenshots and told me that I was anti-white, that I was promoting white genocide, because, you know, talking about diversity in children's literature promotes white genocide. I don't actually get that connection myself, but this is the ideology that was coming at me. And if I had been 20 years later, we would have had a showdown in the parking lot, right? But age has mellowed me, and I was able to say to her, you're right, I actually made a mistake. I shouldn't have used such incendiary language. I wouldn't do it again. And that I hoped she would actually sit down, because she'd accused me of having an LGBT agenda also. And I said, I hope she would sit down and actually listen to my presentation and talk to me about it. And she did. And this woman who was so angry and thought all these like horrible things about diversity actually came up to me after the presentation and said, "You're right, I see your point. We do need diversity in children's literature." And she gave me a hug. So like this was a conversation. Of course, I was actually the only one talking during the presentation, but she listened.
And that happened, I think, because you were willing to say, "You're right, I made a mistake."
Exactly.
And it is so hard for us to say, "I made a mistake," or "I'm sorry," and to just accept that and acknowledge it, rather than figure out ways to get around it and justify it.
Exactly. Yeah. I would also like to get to a point where racism isn't a dirty word and that people don't react to being called a racist with that, you know, that like jerk reaction of, "How dare you call me a racist?" Like it's some kind of fighting words kind of thing. And instead, why don't we treat it like it's an illness? Why don't we treat it like it is a disease that we as a community, as a society, have to work together to come up with a solution and resolve it? Because it's systemic, it's in everything, and if we don't actually work together to address that issue, it's just going to continue. All we'll do is kind of band-aid over the problem. What were you saying? People will just try to game the system?
Game the system instead of change the system.
Exactly, yeah. So uncomfortable conversations, like sometimes with family too, right? So, but what is next for us? Like what?
Yeah, what would 3.0 look like, right? So 2.0 looks like, to me, advocacy and staying with the discomfort. And I have this really superficial connection, which is I'm trying to grow out my hair. Okay, let's just go to this. And my hairdresser, I sat in the chair 3 days ago and I said, "Cut it all off." I wanted to cut again because I can't stand this anymore. And she said to me, as a good hairdresser will, "No, no." She said, "I'm going to walk you through this plateau." And I said, "All right." And some of you are like, "We're talking about hair. How did we segue here?" But stay with me, people. Okay, so she said, "No, no, we will walk through this plateau." She said, "I know, it doesn't feel like what you want to," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just hair. It's the most superficial thing. But we're like in the plateau. So we have to stay together and walk through this uncomfortable plateau, this ugly phase of being uncomfortable, of learning to have delicate conversations and not deferring always to being, no, I don't want to say deferring to be polite, because I do believe in politeness. I do believe in offering each other grace. I do believe in offering each other respect always, even when we're having hard conversations. But don't defer to silence, to standing next to each other silently.
Don't be the
and
bystander.
thinking things without saying.
I think the bystander effect is something that we all have to continue to recognize. Even I do it sometimes, right? Where you just feel too awkward and too uncomfortable to confront a situation that you know is problematic. Sometimes it's because it's dangerous and you're scared, which actually self-preservation is always first, of course. But if there is safety, I think it's, we can't be bystanders. We have to have the conversation. We have to tell that racist uncle that they're being racist, or your mother.
Or even approaching, as a parent, sometimes approaching schools about their book lists or their curricula. And one thing that, I guess 3.0-ish that we've seen is that schools have been approaching WNDB and saying, we want to do a curriculum review. And there are books that we know that our community holds dear, that there are likely other books that could replace them or be added to the curricula, but we need to figure out how to have this conversation with our community, but we're willing to figure that out. We're willing to have these conversations. There's a book that a lot of people love that when I was a kid and read it, I did not like at all, To Kill a Mockingbird. And it was a book that I had heard so much about and just was supposed to be so great. And so when I read it, I was furious because I did not like it at all. And it's a lot of people's favorites and on a lot of curricula. And for my daughter, when it was on her curriculum in middle school, and when she first got it, I was like, oh yeah, I hate that book. And we talked a little bit about why, but I didn't really talk too much about it because she was going to read it herself, so I wanted her to. So she came up feeling some type of way after she read it, but was able to articulate that to her teacher and in her classroom. And then I guess, you know, the school was kind of like, where'd that come from? Or we're a progressive school, we're already doing all these wonderful things, but was able to sort of have this conversation within the discussion of the book of who has power in this story, who has agency in this story, what does this mean? So while the book, as far as I know, is still part of that curriculum, at least there's a willingness to discuss it and discuss why, and think about everyone in the community and how these stories affect everyone, not just the people who are like, this is a classic, and it's been here and I love it.
Mm-hmm. The Washington Post just had a fantastic piece on challenging the canon.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to look that up. It was within a week or two, I think.
Yeah,
it was really wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So 3.0
so
thing I'd like to, oh, I'm sorry. The other 3.0 thing is I'm always interested in who's still missing from the table.
Yeah. Oh,
and so within Latino literature, I will tell you, I would like to see more authors from Honduras, from El Salvador, from other countries. If you want to understand the situation that we're facing right now with immigration, with our borders and so on, you have to know that history to see how we got here. We need more Afro-Latino authors at the table. So those are two areas that I think within Latino Kidlit, I'd like to see more of in there.
We definitely need more Native, First Nations writers, Indigenous writers writing about their own cultures, because their voice is missing. I mean, we have a few, we need more, right?
People with disabilities, too.
Yes.
Stories of people with disabilities that are not, well, in all these cases that are not problem stories, but stories about people living rich and full lives in their own way.
Exactly. I mean, I have two kids that suffer from crippling depression, and they are always looking for the books that isn't about suicide or that glamorizes suicide. What is with that, right? We need the books that show them that it's okay, you can live and be successful even with a mental disease. We also need, like for me, Asian American Pacific Islander is this great big like amalgam, right? Let's talk about how big that is. And we tend to focus on East Asian writing the most, East and Southeast Asian writers. We don't have enough Pacific Islander authors being published. We're not hearing their voice. So I do think there's a lot of holes there that we need to fill. But I think now we have time for questions, because I see people wanting to ask. So can we now have questions? Yes? Would you like to ask?
And someone spoke to you about your Facebook post, and then you spoke about your daughter being able to articulate and have these types of conversations. And I'm wondering, how do you teach people not to be bystanders and voice their concerns articulately without being incendiary? And then also, how do you speak so that people want to have understanding and compassionate conversations? Because people do get on the defense when you bring up racism or bias or bigotry. So how do you have compassionate, understanding conversations?
So you know how like you have if you get an email and you get really, really angry, you're at work, you get an email, it makes you mad, and it's probably your boss, and you get really mad, you start typing a really angry email, but you don't hit send, because self-preservation, you don't want to get fired, right? That split second where you recognize what you're gonna say is gonna be bad, that's what saved me in so many conversations, that I've had the ability to stop, to bite my tongue, to push back the defensiveness, by the way, which usually that comes up, or the anger, and then try to engage them in a conversation and deflate their anger. So when, like for example, when somebody's called a racist, they get mad, right? How do you then address the issue without getting that first gut reaction. For me, it's always been to kind of like be the calmer one, but and kind and gentle and say, I understand why you're upset by hearing this. Let's talk about those feelings. And I think that you have to come in compassion, because if you're just too calm, then they get mad because they're like, oh, you think you're better than me, right? So it's kind of like that being compassionate and empathetic while trying to have a difficult conversation.
And I think one thing, like for my daughter, one thing that she's fortunate with is that she has always had school experiences from the very beginning where that kind of social and emotional learning and those effective communication lessons were always apart from kindergarten on. And so a resource that I would recommend is I love the Morningside Center for Teaching Social Responsibility. And I use those, so the things that when I used to work with first graders and second graders and fifth graders on how to have these hard conversations and talk in circles were the things that sometimes when my daughter was little and would come home and I would kind of roll my eyes like, yeah, nobody really talks like this, and like, okay. But I see how they work, and I see how when children have that as part of their education at school, and I mean, I'm fortunate that I can reinforce it at home, but using those kind of lessons, I use them all the time. And I like the lessons for elementary schoolers, I can go back and look at these when I know that I'm going to be in a situation where I might have to have a challenging conversation. Literally go back and look at those lessons for teachers or of any age and think about how I can apply them in the conversations I'm going to have.
I'm going to just butt in. Because I'm remembering Tim Tingle. We did one of our first conferences here at the Library of Congress. It was talking about family through the multicultural lens, like various people. How do we see and write about family? And Ellen was on that panel. But so is Tim Tingle, who's a Choctaw author. And he said, to a very similar question, I remember that I am meeting them on the bridge that they are crossing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And I never forgot those words, because when I'm talking with someone who has a very deeply different point of view, or a point of view that I find hurtful or just small in some way, I try to remember that they're on a journey, right? And I'm going to try to be there and help them cross that bridge. They won't all, and that's sad. But you know what is also true? I'm on a journey crossing a bridge for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
There are going to be moments that I make a mistake or I am not the most empathetic. And I hope that I'm greeted with grace. And I get a lot of stuff for that, like for being too soft on people sometimes, and I understand, but I think that if we allow the conversation to just spiral up and get really terse, we stop listening. It's like when my husband and I fight, right? Like, what? Who's listening, right? So like, we gotta go to the ice cream parlor and share a hot fudge sundae or something, and then we can get to the bottom of things, which tells you how our family runs.
I also think sometimes that you might feel like the conversation's not going anywhere, but you never know. Yeah. You plant those seeds wherever you can so that you're not the bystander, that you have those moments where you just kind of provide somebody with a different perspective. And that maybe that will become a growing lesson for them. You won't see it, but maybe somebody else will, 10 years from now.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Right, yeah. Any other questions?
I think they're close to their train time.
Know,
they're
right?
all like, I've got to get to the station.
Yeah. Well, if there's no questions, should we just wrap it up?
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to the panelists here today and to all our panelists. You provided us with so many great topics for future conversations and things to think about. So could we have a round of applause for all the panelists?
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.